Bienvenido, witam, mabuhay, dobrodošli, welcome. I am delighted and honored to be your Archbishop. So many of you in this cathedral today have come from near and far, friends and family, brother bishops and priests, religious, lay women and men, former parishioners and pastors from Omaha, Rapid City, Spokane have joined us as well. Your being here consoles me with the hope that our friendships will continue to endure in the years ahead. I'm also grateful for the presence of the Holy Father in the person of our Apostolic Nuncio, Archbishop Vigano. Welcome, Archbishop. And in your presence here today, we feel the presence and experience the presence of our Holy Father, whom we love so much. When it came to selecting a date for the installation, November 18th seemed to be a good fit. The commemoration of the dedication of the basilicas of Saints Peter and Paul gives me a chance to recognize all immigrants, as I recall my own immigrant grandparents who helped establish my home parish of St. Peter and Paul in Omaha. Additionally, the church's calendar today celebrates Saint Philippine Duchesne, someone the native people honored with the name Woman Who Prays Always. She reminds us of the extraordinary contribution women religious have made and continue to make to the church and society. I intend to honor and give thanks for all these people today, especially for family and immigrants, Native Americans, and religious sisters, all of whom have shaped so much of our faith, our lives, and my ministry. But I have to admit that I had a bit of a panic attack when I saw the gospel provided in the lectionary for this day, which we just heard. Now I realize this new responsibility is going to be demanding. But seriously, folks, I don't do walking on water. I can barely swim. So I hope this image in today's gospel is not reflective of anyone's expectations. In all honesty, what intrigues me about the readings for today is how the gospel and the first reading from Acts complement each other in the language and the symbolism that they share in common. The gospel recounts Jesus during his earthly life, walking on water, inviting Peter to join him. And Acts witnesses to how Paul and the church, animated by the Spirit, following the resurrection, now crosses the seas to evangelize and invite the Gentiles, all people, to encounter and to walk with the risen Christ. That interplay of the two texts is so rich and captures something St. Leo the Great wrote centuries ago. Pope Leo remarked that everything which was visible in Jesus' words and actions during his hidden life and public ministry has passed over after Christ's resurrection into the sacraments and in the life of the church. That truth is on full display in the readings today, to the point that the gospel is more than an account of Jesus walking on water, more than a story of Jesus revealing his divinity to the disciples by a stunning show of power. Read alongside the story of Paul's missionary journeys, this gospel text becomes a point of reference to understand the meaning of the resurrection, how the risen Lord is working in our midst today, and how disciples in all ages, how the church in our time should view its mission. Simply put, we are to join Christ in seeking out, inviting, and accompanying by abiding with those to whom he sends us. Each one of those aspects of our mission, seeking out, inviting, and accompanying, deserve a closer look. Jesus' walk across the water is intentional. He has come to seek out, to save the troubled, those who are lost. But this scene from Matthew's Gospel offers a new insight. It gives us a glimpse into what compels him to take up this message. Jesus, we're told, has been on the mountain in the quiet intimacy of prayer with his Father. That experience of sharing life with the Father is what moves him, prompts him to go out and seek others so that they too may have this life. He is so driven in this mission that nothing stands in his way, not even the obstacle of crossing over water on his own. Sharing his life with the Father, with us, is a source of enthusiasm. His enthusiasm and determination is his motivation for seeking out the disciples, and is the reason why he has come into the world. We see a similar kind of drive and enthusiasm in people from time to time, where something so transformative and life-giving happens to them, leaving them with no alternative but to spend their life sharing their experience with others. I've seen that kind of experience and enthusiasm in great teachers. Their drive and incentive goes way beyond getting through a curriculum or earning a paycheck. What inspires the really good teacher is the transformative experience of insight that comes in learning. Really good teachers delight in seeing the light of discovery go on in their students' eyes, and they never pass up the chance to make that happen. Marie Walsh was such a person. I brought her communion on First Fridays during my first years as a priest. A retired English teacher, she never passed up a chance to share her knowledge of literature and language. Marie suffered from diverticulitis and could only take a small part of the host. One day, after giving her the Eucharist and a sip of water, she began to cough. And so I said, "Marie, would you like to lay down?" She sharply muttered something, which I didn't catch. And so I asked her, "Marie, what did you say?" She held the back of my neck and with a laugh in her voice scolded me. "I said, chickens lay eggs. People lie down." She was correcting my grammar. It didn't matter if she was in great pain or frail. She was going to make sure that I spoke proper English. We face, in our day, the formidable task of passing on the faith to the next generation, of evangelizing a modern and sometimes skeptical culture, not to mention inspiring young people to serve the church as priests and religious. It all seems so daunting as walking on water. We are at sea, unsteady in our approach, faced with these concerns. Catechists and educators are on the front lines of this struggle. So too, parents and grandparents wonder if they're going to be the last Catholics in their family. Likewise, bishops and priests find that the good news is increasingly difficult to proclaim in the midst of a great polarization in the church and in society. Jesus tells all of us today to go back to where our journey of faith began, to be in touch with the joyful experience of being transformed by the intimacy God offers us, to be willing to share it with the next generation. Young people have always been attracted to authenticity of life, where words match deeds. Let's not be afraid to let our young people know about our life with God and how it began. Like Marie Walsh, let's stay close to them. So close that we can hold them by the back of the neck and tell them what it means for us to believe, and share with them how the gospel has brought joy and meaning to us and has transformed our lives. Such witness of personal faith many times has made the skeptic take a second look, has inspired vocations. and in my experience, animates our advocacy on behalf of human dignity with joy and compassion, purifying it of anger, harshness, and fear. The authenticity that comes in making our own baptismal calling the starting point of all we do is also demanded of me as your Archbishop, particularly as I reach out to those who have been sexually abused by those who serve in the name of the Church. That starting point, with its challenge to be loving and just and true, will always be needed for me and my brother bishops to keep fresh the serious duty to honor and keep the promises that we made in 2002, working together to protect children, to bring healing to victim survivors, and to rebuild the trust that has been shattered in our communities by our failures is our sacred duty, and so is holding each other accountable, for that is what we pledged to do. Jesus seeks out, but then he invites. Come, he says to Peter, walk on the stormy waters with me. Jesus calls him to courage, and Peter's response is a brave act for an experienced fisherman, but it is the kind of daring and boldness that's required today, the courage to leave our comfort zone and take an entirely new step in our faith journey, both personally and as a community. There is always resistance in each one of us to that risk. We can be self-satisfied where we are. Pope Francis tells us that the temptation is to think and say, I'm religious enough, I'm Catholic enough. Or for the church leaders to resist needed reform by claiming, we haven't done that before. You can't say that. We all have some anxiety and hesitancy to change. And I've noticed that many times in life we deal with the tension by joking about our resistance to change, to grow, to become more, to go beyond the minimum and enter more deeply into our life with God. A friend who is a baseball fan tells me that when he thinks about getting to heaven, he's counting on being able to slide into home plate on a steal. On a hot, sultry day, I was boarding a plane, and I was struggling to put my carry-on bag in the overhead bin. The people behind me weren't happy with me holding up the line as the air conditioning wasn't on. So finally, the man next to me put his bag down, took mine in hand, and effortlessly shoved it in the compartment, leaving me very embarrassed. Then, to my surprise, he said at the top of his voice for everybody to hear, "Well, Father, will that get me to heaven?" I was so flustered. All I could think to say was, "Gee, I hope not on this flight." Jesus invites us not only to take the risk of leaving our comfort zones, but also to deal with the tension involved in change, not dismissively, but in a creative way, and to challenge each other to do so. Maybe we hear that challenge today as a call to leave behind our comforting convictions that episodic Sunday Mass attendance is good enough, that we really don't have to change our habitual bad behavior, our unhealthy dependencies, our inordinate attachments, because we can get by as we are, because they haven't gotten us into any serious trouble yet, or just because we're afraid of the unknown. Pope Francis is giving voice to this invitation in our day by inviting the whole church to come and walk with Christ, as he is always doing something new. It's an invitation to leave behind the comfort of going the familiar way. He is challenging us to recognize that Christ is always inviting us to more, to greater things. It's the kind of invitation our Bishops' Conference is making to our nation, to be what it has always promised to be, to protect the vulnerable, the poor, the weak, to treat immigrants with justice and dignity, to respect life, and to be good stewards of creation. It is the invitation of Jesus. Come, take the risk of being more. Finally, Jesus gets into the boat. I've always thought that it took more courage for Jesus to get into that boat with those disciples than for Peter to get out of it and walk on the water. There was fear and doubt and jealousy and even anger in that boat. There were a lot of unresolved conflicts, as a therapist might put it. But it is in the incomplete, the in-between, in the brokenness of our lives where Jesus comes to share his life in the Father with us. His coming to us, his communion with us, is not for the perfect, but is for the salvation of souls, for the lost, the forlorn, and those who are adrift. His communion is not just a quick visit, but he wants to be with us to the point of making our lives the dwelling place, the home where he and his Father abide. After going to the mountain to pray, to be with his Father, he comes into our messy lives with his Father in hand, to share our lives where we are. It is that grace of the indwelling of the Spirit, the love of the Father and the Son, which has always been the source of real, ongoing, and sustainable conversion. It is the grace of mercy, totally undeserved and unearned, that brings about lasting change and transformation and gives life. So we as a church should not fear leaving the security of familiar shores, the peacefulness of the mountaintop of our self-assuredness, but rather walk into the mess. A military chaplain recently told me that soldiers easily know where to find him in the battle encampment because the chaplain's tent is most often next to the med tent. While Pope Francis is famous for urging the church to be a field hospital and for pastors to know the smell of the sheep, Blessed Pope Paul VI expressed a similar sentiment with an inspiring message to my classmates nearly 40 years ago on their day of ordination. And this is what he said: know how to accept as an invitation the very reproach which perhaps and often unjustly the world hurls against the messenger of the gospel. Know how to listen to the groan of the poor, the candid voice of the child, the thoughtful cry of youth, the complaint of the tired worker, the sigh of the suffering, and the criticism of the thinker. But never be afraid. The Lord has repeated it. Of course, as our papal nuncio reminded the bishops just last week, St. John Paul II began his pontificate with Christ's comforting words to the disciples, "Do not fear." Archbishop Vigano then added, "We must not be afraid to walk with our Holy Father, Pope Francis, and to trust in the infinite value of following the Holy Spirit as our first teacher in guiding the church." That, my friends, is the urging of the Word of God today. Just as Jesus left the peacefulness of his mountaintop to pray, to embrace his disciples in all their too human and fallible journey, so now the church in our day is called to be faithful to its mission. The mission taken up by Paul and Peter, by putting aside our fears and the allure of false securities, and leap into the turbulent but creative waters of life in the world with the guidance of God and the charge of the gospel. Not being afraid is the gift that separates the disciple before and after the resurrection, as we see in the responses of Peter and Paul through the readings today. Yet, it is providential that Peter experienced the terror that stormy night, For he could then uniquely witness for the church in all ages through his successors the power of the resurrection to vanquish all fears, disappointments, hesitations, and doubts. Peter could then witness how the resurrection is not just a past event, but an ongoing reality. He could remind us that what Jesus did in crossing the sea, he did again by crossing from death to life, from eternity to our eternity, as he continues to make that crossing with us today. He could then tell us that Jesus came back from the dead for us, to be with us. That is the reason we're not afraid, because we're not alone. That is why now in our day, Peter and his successor, Pope Francis, urges us to take up the task of crossing the seas, to seek out, to invite, and to accompany others, because the risen Christ is in the boat with us.